I'm still processing the last few weeks. It felt
It's
so nice and happy, and there was a lot of momentum. And then the last 2 weeks hit, and everything went to a grinding halt, and then skyrocketed to out of control speeds, and then came crashing down. And now I feel like I'm sort of crawling out of the rubble, and I haven't processed it yet.
I feel the same. I feel like I got a lot of messages in a very compressed amount of time, or so it felt. And a lot of like really strange, incredibly direct, not at all what I'm used to type of like, here, we're going to speak through you, turn your mic on and just talk, and we're going to deliver you a message, and it's going to be fairly clear and upfront. And then it just kind of floated away. And then it's just been a mix of like outside world 3D stuff, trying to clean up the mess of the last several weeks. And I feel, I don't feel disconnected, but I feel not as connected as I was a week and a half ago. So if that makes any sense whatsoever. But there is a lot that's like, uh, there's a lot that's kind of like coming in layers. And so I feel like it's, if I really sit in the middle of like the energy of it, it feels like we've been entering pockets where things are lining up perfectly. And when those happen, like it is on. And then we'll kind of drift out of that pocket again. And then things will be a little hazy and a little slow. And maybe one thing picks up and then another thing slows down. And then sometimes that stops. And then all of a sudden you're in another pocket again. And it makes me think of, we were watching a YouTube channel the other day, which was a gal that had a bunch of home videos from like the early 80s, like home movies from Disneyland. And we were watching a video that had America Sings on it. And that's kind of how I've felt. It's like if you're on this rotating thing, and when you line up, you get to watch the show and everything is clear and everything is cool. And then, but you keep moving. And then you're in these periods of like, and everything's dark, or you're hearing audio for the thing that's coming up, but you can't see anything yet, or, you know, something such as.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I life has been a challenge, especially this last 2 weeks. The week before that, of course, I was sick. You were sick. We were sick. Miles apart, and yet we get sick at the same time. Um, and up until that point, it really felt like things were clicking away, moving really nice and fast. And then the sickness came and took me down. And as much as I didn't want to be sick, I was a little grateful for the sick because it forced me to not. And I gave into that really easily. I was leery because usually when I get any sort of respiratory anything going on, it takes me months to recover, even in a non-COVID environment. and I didn't know what I had. It doesn't, really matter what you have. It matters how quickly you're getting over it. So I was leery because some important stuff was coming up that I needed to be there for. And amazingly enough, I got through it in a week. Usually it goes to my chest, it becomes bronchitis, but it didn't this time. And so this was the first time I'd been sick since that wacky dream I had about Metatron giving me new lungs. Do you remember that dream?
I do remember that dream. That was awesome.
I mean, Tin Hat awesome.
Hey,
Yeah. And,
lungs.
you just kind of wonder. I mean, you kind of wonder if, was that a thing? Was that like really like,
It's like legit.
I think it was
Yeah.
now. I had kind of waited to see. I mean, I had taken the fact that I hadn't gotten sick yet through a whole pandemic, that maybe it's because of that lung transplant, that weirdness. So the dream was that I had, I woke up into the dream, if that makes sense. Like
Sure.
all of a sudden I had been asleep and then I woke up and I was sort of floating above the ground, prone, like laying down on a table, but there was no table. And I was just
Mm-hmm.
sort of floating there and
Levitating.
levitating. Yes. And this uh, entity was next to me. I don't remember exactly what he looked like. I think I had a visual in the dream, but also I think it maybe kept changing in the dream. I know that he presented as male, and I think he might have had a mask, like a surgeon's mask on, um, which makes sense given that when I looked down at my body, I was spread open, like slit down the middle and spread
Well, that's
open.
always fun.
And he was reaching into my
Ew.
chest, and I was like, what is
Double ew.
happening? Right? What is happening? And I was more intrigued by it than terrified of it. I wasn't terrified at all. I was like, what's going on? And he, I guess, maybe communicated, or I just knew what he was saying. So I guess it was telepathic communication. And he said, you'll need new lungs. And I said, what? Why? And he kind of gave me, like what I had been through, um, some of the things that I had come across when I was trying to figure out why I was so prone to bronchitis, why I was prone to asthma, why I hadn't taken a breath in over a year. Lord only knows how long. I literally had not had one full breath. Um, and it was all attached to grief. Apparently, Gemini is the sign of grief. Like, if you're a Gemini, then
I'll believe that.
chances are you will experience a lot of grief in your life. And I certainly have and was at the time, prior to this dream. I think prior to this dream, maybe a year prior, that's when I had started to heal all of that grief that was, and purge it, and do all that wonderful stuff us spiritual people like to talk about, purging and healing and releasing and all that crap. um, and it culminated with this dream of Metatron giving me new lungs. He said I would need new lungs to get through what was coming. And I was
For
like,
sure.
right? I was like, okay. And it felt like it had something to do, like there was something with the lungs attached to the immune system. It wasn't just that I needed a new organ because the old organ had been damaged by all of the asthma and the bronchitis and the grief and the, all of that. It was beyond that. It felt like something was attached to this transplant that had to do with boosting the immune system and then also fixing what was broken, so to speak, in the lungs. And it was a very weird experience. And I could definitely see how if it were in a movie, it would be considered a horror movie because, like, you could see everything, you just knew. There was another energy there assisting him. I don't know who she was. It was smaller. That's all I remember. And then I woke up and that was the dream, but it always stuck with me. I never wrote it down. I never really forgot it. And I've always been kind of curious what that meant.
Can we just stop for a moment and talk about how interesting it is that when things like that happen, and I'm talking about when we're seeing things either in like dream time or a meditation or something that is, kind of cloaked in that spiritual haze, that it usually does not freak us out, that we're like completely curious and not at all phased. Like, what is that? Because I mean, I can't watch a scary movie. I cannot sit down and watch a scary movie without like my hands over my eyes. Like I know how this shit works. I've done, you know, prop work and set work and things like that, and I know exactly how all of these things are made and that it's not real and blah blah blah. Blah. And yet, I see something that level of freaky in a spiritual context, and I'm like, oh no, that's totally cool. I'm fine. Like, what is that? It's very interesting to me that we have this, we're always talking about, things like duality. And I think that's just a very interesting flip that happens when you're dealing with something on a more spiritual nature. I think those of us who are open to that just tend to be more open to those experiences with like absolutely no sort of like, hold on, why am I opened up? What the hell? Like I think it's kind of an interesting thing.
Well, I think we innately know in those situations that what we're seeing is symbolism meant to communicate to us what's going on spiritually. I think we know full on on a
Sure.
deeper level that, what we're witnessing isn't, we're not actually opened up, from from stem to stern, where it's just spirit's way of saying, "Hey, by the way, we're going in and doing some heavy duty lifting on your behalf." And they use all of those visuals to communicate. And I think the more that you get into communicating with your guides and doing things like channeling or whatever it is that you do, whatever you specialize in, um, you just you get used to the vibration or the frequency or the feeling of that kind of communication, and it flips a switch automatically in your brain. It's a good trigger for once. For once, there's just, once you
Yeah.
get into this, you have a trigger that automatically tells your brain you're safe and your ego doesn't need to get involved and freak out anymore. And that's one of the blessings, if you will, of getting into this sort of thing. It takes the humanity out of it, and you can have a true spiritual experience. we're, we're laughing because Jamie's husband is in the background being Jamie's husband, and no matter what we do,
You
we
know,
cannot silence the bear.
no, there's just no way you're going to hear him in the
Mm-hmm.
background occasionally
Mm-hmm.
from time to time. He might even chime in from time to time. Here's the thing, though, and this is why it's particularly funny today. I had a conversation with him not 5 minutes before we got ready to do this, where he was like clanking around in the kitchen and making a lot. I'm like, that I'm going to be recording, right? And he's like, well, yeah, that's why I'm doing this now. And he's clearing his throat, and I'm like, well, that means that too. And he's like, what? I'm like, the clearing of the throat, yo. And he's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, come on now, you know how loud you are. You're loud. Like,
It really doesn't, though.
there's the back door. Like go out there or something. And then I've been really good this time trying to mute my mic when I'm not talking. And literally the second I I unmute myself, he coughs. I'm like, oh man, we were so close. We were
there's
so close.
there's no controlling the bear.
Anyways, no, it's just gonna be that way.
Yeah.
Whatevs.
Yeah.
Whatevs. I'm good. Holy crap.
So I think the important thing
Um,
about being sick and giving into it is, figuring out what work is being done, because any physical manifestations in the body of unwellness, of illness, are also spiritual in nature. So if you can sit there and give into it and kind of figure out, the why of it makes it a little bit easier to go through the uncomfortable, you know?
it does, and for most of us, we've kind of grown up in this culture of you just keep on. You just keep on doing. Don't think about it. Try not to think about being sick. And push forward and push ahead, and you can't take time off, and all of those things. And this is kind of a way, and I think, like, on a whole, the one thing that this pandemic has done is, of course, and fortunately and unfortunately, for those that have really needed the, like, hey, you cannot keep functioning like this because you're not actually functioning. Something will find a way to slow you down for you if you cannot see that you need to do that for yourself. And, I think that is a big group lesson that we've been learning. I know for me, I definitely slowed down and paid attention, and there were days when I literally just sat there and vegged out and watched TV and fell asleep and woke up and fell asleep and woke up. I was knocked out more often than not during this. And I was lucky that, again, very similar to you, it was not severe, but it had very definite targeted areas. So for me, it was a lot of, like, it was not in my chest, thank goodness, but it has been in my sinuses and my ears. And I'm still moving through stuff with that, but I've also, I was one of those kids where I was sick a lot as a kid, and they've definitely been showing me that, like, my lymph system has been, very impacted for a long time. And so this is really helping to make me aware of that, because I think I've been having issues in those arenas and just thinking it was something else, and not really taking care of that. So I've been doing that more in the last week or so, and that's definitely helping. But, and of course, I'm impatient and I want everything done, like, hey, I've done a thing for 2 days. Am I good yet? No? Why not? It's like, look, lady, this didn't happen overnight, and it's not getting cleared overnight. So slow your roll. It's going to happen when it happens. Just, keep being aware of it. And it's like, all right, fine. But, yeah, it's been interesting. And I did want to speak to the whole, talking about how we receive and perceive things when we're kind of more in that spiritual mode. And I think for me, one thing that it does bring up is that, as far as that, like, not being startled and, being okay when we may see things or experience things that would at other times appear really scary or really unsafe to us, kind of solidifies for me that we move into a different state of understanding. Like, we move out of that beta state and more into, like, the theta, just like we do with the help of, certain sound and frequencies during meditation. It helps us to be in a place of better receiving. I think that kind of also points to the fact that during those times where we're sitting in a space where we're not trying to task our way through it, we're just experiencing, we're just observing. And when you slow down that mode of, like, task, you do become so much more observant. And it takes a lot of that, like, that normal anxious or, highly emotionally charged stress kind of response away. And I'm definitely very grateful for those times,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're going through something that's uncomfortable, or that, you know, you might have some sort of outside fear about. Um, so yeah, it's been an interesting couple weeks, and now, of course, like I will also say that I'm incredibly thankful that we had some nice cool days during that time,
Mm-hmm.
that we were not experiencing a hot streak, because hell, we are experiencing it right now. It's supposed to go away again. So it's
Yeah, but
supposed to
not
be
as
slipping back down in the 70s, but dang, I feel
but
summer
not as
coming, and I'm
for
like,
it
stay
is,
away.
and it's not slipping down as much as they thought it would. They were still going to have, 86, 87 in there, here and there, sprinkled in those 70s, and it's like, okay, it's only May. Like, May gray. Come on, May gray. Where's the gray for May? And I my fingers are crossed for June gloom. That's all I can say, because
Yeah,
the thought of having summer from now until, which we've had before, it wouldn't be the first time, you know.
yeah,
But I'm not ready. I'm never ready. There's never going to be a time when I'm ready for it
yeah.
to be 106 degrees. Not ever. But
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
let's just put it off a little while
And
longer.
I look at people who love it, and I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like, I am just so not at all attuned to any of that.
Mm-mm.
Like, you know, I love me some sun energy, and I am grateful, and plants growing and all the things, whatever, that's cool. It's just like, just leave me out of it. Like, if I can please absorb my D, you know, filtered and through through means that don't make my skin fry and don't make me feel like I'm walking in sludge, that would be great.
Because when you're as white as we are, that sun cooks you like chicharrones, and the end, man. You're bubbling up, you're red, you're pink, you're crispy. It's not cute. It's not comfortable. It's not good.
It's definitely not cute or comfortable, and I can hear kids in the pool right now, and I'm like, oh, you kids, you're in the nice pool, the nice non-heated, mostly shaded. It's probably only, you know, 60 something degrees in the water right now. It's like, oh, what a good. If my ears weren't clogged up, I'd so be jumping in there right after this. That is not going to happen.
So, what sort of messages did you get while you were sick? What
You
came through for
know,
you?
it's so crazy because it was random. It was random. The only thing that I was really trying to occasionally get done, because I didn't want to fall behind so late in the semester, with school. So I paced myself, and there were times when I was like, man, I hope this is good enough, because I cannot brain I'm running on autopilot here. I am leaning on the fact that a lot of these subjects are subjects that I already know pretty well, and I'm hoping that I can coast through. But holy moly, I'd be in the middle of an assignment, and stuff would just come through. The really interesting thing for me during this illness, and it started happening right before, but it's continued, is so I can't remember if I've mentioned it before, but in the last several years, I've been working a lot with Magdalene and energy. It's definitely something that I am aligned to, and through just experiences with regression and, you know, other things that have come up for me, that's something that I'm obviously very aligned to. And so I am still working my way through discovering a lot of what that means. A lot of people are going to be familiar with the word Magdalene through Bible stories, Mary Magdalene. And although, yes, that is a particular character that is involved, it is a much more interesting and broader energy than that. And there are many who feel, and I feel this way as well, that, this is just one of many names that we have for that energy. It's been around a really long time. It was here possibly even before the planet. I feel that it was definitely here before the planet, just from my own experiences. But part of that energy and part of the kind of cast of characters that comes along with that is the Sophia, which a lot of people refer to as kind of like the some people refer to it as the like the sacred feminine portion of the creative energy. There's various ways that it gets interpreted, but I have had that energy come through. And I will say that it is probably, from all of my guides, all of my interactions with angels, etc., galactic beings and whatnot, that this energy has come through the clearest and most concise out of all of them. And it's refreshing and really interesting all at the same time. But sometimes I feel like the messages were triggered. And then sometimes I feel like the messages were just out of nowhere, like triggered by just happenstance through conversation. Like, I think we were talking, and one of the most interesting ones was, I think we randomly and very briefly brought up twin flame energy. And we had gotten off the phone. You needed to leave and go do something. And all of a sudden it's like, turn the recorder on. I have something to say about that. And so I sat and just rambled for like maybe 20 minutes. And it was very interesting. And it's been a little over a week or so now. So I'm trying to remember exactly what the message was. But it was interesting because one thing that I am always faced with, like, I worked at a metaphysical shop for several years, and everybody that came through that door would have a different idea of what the term twin flame or soul flame meant. But each one was very like driven in what that meant and what that meant to them. And it's, ultimately it's going to be whatever you needed to be in that moment to learn and experience whatever it is that you need to learn and experience in that moment, which is essentially what the message was. But it was given in a really beautiful way. Like, I know that I always had a really difficult time telling people that, it could be any one of a number of things, because they are so bent on their definition that they have in their head that's in front of them at that moment. And this message that came through was really nice in that it was like, okay, let me break this down for you, depending on where you are in your journey and depending on what you've experienced, there are going to be different phases or faces of this particular subject that are going to come through for you. And it might shift throughout your time of learning, and basically whatever it is that you need to connect with at that time is the thing that's going to pop up. So it explained all these little things kind of connected to different portions of the twin flame aspect. Like you'll hear, oh, like twin flame relationships are really volatile, and it's like, you know, opposing magnets, and these aren't necessarily people that you're meant to be in a relationship with, and most likely you'll butt heads. And this energy came through and was like, yes, that may be something that you experience, but it's not that the entirety of that term is going to show up that way, or that it's always going to show up that way for you, or that it's going to show up that way for anyone else. You know, it really is an individualized thing. And so it was nice to kind of have that confirmation of, oh, okay, I see that, you know, that's because I always felt that way.
What way?
And that it was just going to show up however it was going to show up for the individual, as necessary, as needed. That, you know, it don't put a particular stamp on it and just leave it at that. Allow room, as I would for most things, you know, allow room for it to be something different for you. But yeah, I always thought that that was kind of an, you know, an interesting thing, especially when we'd you know, you'd have different things to help you work with that energy, like a candle or a scent or a something. And it's like, I always felt that that was so hard. It's like, well, I don't know, what does it mean to you? I can't tell you how to work with it or what to do about it unless I know what it means to you. I have to know what, you know, give me context.
Well, and
Show me where you're at.
what you just said there is really important because as you were talking, they were talking to me from my
Okay.
perspective about the same subject. And what they were saying was, you know, one of the things that when I'm working with someone, the first thing I do is I try to make them aware of how often or little they recognize their own definitions of words. For most people, it's not a thing that occurs to them. They think that whatever the definition of a word is the definition of the word. And it's been, you grew up with it. You know, you grew up with the definition of success. You grew up with the definition of abundance. You grew up with the definition of respect. You grew up with the definition of manners. And this is one of the basic tenets that we all think is real that isn't, and gets us screwed up in our communication with other people because we assume that the definition we were given as a child or a young adult, however long, you know, it's been instilled in you, the definitions that we were instilled with about common life things between people in relationships are not necessarily shared by other people
Mm-mm.
in your relationships. And one of the biggest problems is that because we assume that everybody knows what success is, everybody knows what it is to respect someone, you know, because we take that for granted, we screw up our relationships and think it's the other person just being an asshole. And so what the guide said as you were talking was one of the things that all of this spiritual jargon, before it actually, you know, these spiritual terms that we come up with, it's a chance to create something new so that the words that we're using don't have such weight and gravitas behind them and are instead more easy to create with. You can, they're flexible, they're mutable, and words are supposed to be mutable. And people take words at face value without even realizing that their face value is learned over decades and through
There's
much trauma.
symbols.
Yes, there's symbols, but the point is that people forget what they're symbolic of. They don't realize that
Mm-hmm.
they've attached certain traumatic experiences to them. They've attached certain needs that were never met to them. They've attached certain rewards to them. If I behave this way, I will get love. You know, well, when you get into really looking at the term love, you realize that there are many definitions. And not only that, but love can express itself in many ways, but true love expresses itself regardless of how you behave. And that's not a concept that I think a lot of people understand. It takes a while to get there. That's kind of a top level, top shelf concept. But I thought it was interesting that, I had never looked at spiritual terms because they do become jargon after a while. They do end up holding for a lot of people. People want things set in stone so that they know that when they say this one thing, they are correct. And that's not the point of words. So things like concepts like twin flames are purposely meant to be discussed. They're purposely meant to make you wonder if you know it right, if you know the right definition. They're purposely meant to make you inquire about it to someone else who has a completely different definition, and to understand that it is okay to have a completely different definition because it's all true. Because that's a gateway into having compassion for other people when it comes to concepts that we take for granted. And it's a gateway into our own awakening and our own consciousness, or becoming conscious of concepts that we take for granted. And
Sure.
that kind of blows my mind because I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been interesting, like this particular semester in school, that the classes that I'm taking, two of them have overlapped very much so. And this always happens. My educational path has been a huge catalyst for more spiritual work. Things always coincide. They're always in sync. It's really interesting things come up. And this semester in school, symbology has been a really big portion that's come up in two of my classes. And they've kind of ran in tandem with the same message. But like one of the last assignments that I've been working on for one in particular was going over a lot of the early turmoil in Ireland. And what's the difference between the the North versus the South in those cases. We were talking about like the Easter Uprising and the Irish Civil Wars. It's like really what was going on there, and can you look at it and actually tell like who's the freedom fighter and who's the terrorist? It's like, well, it depends on what side of the line you're on. What's your perspective? And really understanding that, there is no true objectivity in history. There's just not. Everything is going to be painted by your own experience. But being able to, look at both sides and study both sides and look at the psychology of both sides and the predicaments of each side, depending on where you're standing, things look very differently, so symbology is really interesting. We have things that trigger certain things in us. And it's not just, people think symbols are like, pictures or a flag, and it's like, well, words are symbols too. Words are symbols for energy and for frequencies. And the frequency that was held at a particular time thousands of years ago is not necessarily held the same way now. It's, even our words have changed. The meanings have changed depending on where you are, who you are, and what your set of beliefs are. It's different. So yeah, that's been a really interesting thing to kind of dive into this
I think it
semester.
I think it would be a cool like paper, maybe I don't know, masters or whatever to look into, because as you were talking again, I was getting something. It was vague, but it there definitely feels like there has to be something to it, because you can't cherry pick these things. You can't have one
Mm-hmm.
thing separate from another. Everything is connected, and given that everything is connected, I find it interesting that wars so often are defined by North and South or East and West. And I
Right.
find that interesting when put through the lens of what do those directions represent? What frequencies do those
Mm-hmm.
directions represent? And was it inevitable that people on those, um, the only thing I can think of is ley line. That's not quite what I mean. I mean, yes, ley line works, but it's not. There's another term for it, and I can't think of it right now. It's eluding me. But what do people on those certain highways of energy on the planet, were they inevitably going to end up in those conflicts regardless? Whoever
Mm-hmm.
was in the north was going to be in the north energy, and whoever was in the south was going to be in the south energy. Because the one thing that they said to me while you were saying that was poles,
Mm-hmm.
polar opposite. And this is our dimension that we are existing in for this lifetime is a dimension of opposites. It's meant for arguments. It's meant for conflict. And we can see that just by having a north and a south pole. The globe is effing
Mm-hmm.
round, yo. There is no corner, there is no top or bottom, except there is, you know?
Yeah.
And so I just think it would be an interesting study to go into different wars. And hell, you could even bring astrology into it and see what the astrological alignment for those particular conflicts were at the time. And then
Mm-hmm.
write the paper through the lens of the north energy and the south energy, or the east energy and the west energy, and why those conflicts were inevitable. They were never not going to happen, because everything energetically had already aligned to support that conflict so that everyone
Mm-hmm.
involved could have that experience. I just think it would
Experience,
be
sure.
I think it would be interesting to see what kind of information would come out of that, and if it would ever reach the point for, those who don't necessarily go in for this kind of thing, um, to become more than coincidence. Is there enough
Yeah.
energetic information out there, given our history? Is there enough that we can find that would make non-believers in these energies and vortices and portals and poles question their own beliefs?
I definitely think so. And hey, you never know. Talk to me in 2 more years, and I might very well be writing that paper.
Why I bring this up?
You know,
Because that's a really interesting. It
it's a
just.
real possibility.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because Lord knows I don't want to write it. So knock yourself out. It'll be nice to finally have someone listen to one of my ideas and go, "Hey, I want to take that on." All right.
Well, and for me, that's kind of that's naturally where I take it when I'm in one of these classes. I can't help but to see it through a spiritual lens, because that's something that's a huge, huge portion of my life. And it is something that I bring up in class discussions. Um, and it's been really interesting because this semester I have, one of my professors, is actually like the director of the department for humanities. And, um, I've spoken with her like once, over Zoom at the beginning of the semester, and it was interesting because I had a couple questions for her just with the little teasers that she had about the class. It's a Celtic anthropology class, and there were several images and things that she used. I'm like, this looks like this. Am I correct? And we had a discussion that was we talked for probably about 45 minutes a couple days before class started. And from there, I already knew that it was going to be kind of an interesting class because she got into this particular subject kind of, I'm not going to say by accident, but by following her own, just her own curiosity. She was already well ingrained in the subject of anthropology, but specifically Celtic anthropology, because it is one of those really odd, like, depending on who you speak to, it either is or is not an actual thing. Depending on if you speak to historians, historians will generally tell you, no, it's not a thing. Like, there is no such peoples. There is no such time period. It is not an actual documented. They did not refer to themselves as Celts. This is not something that happened until more modern times for various reasons. But if you speak to anthropologists, and even anthropologists will have varying opinions on it, but at least anthropologists will usually agree that because of certain aspects, because of it really refers less to a group of people and more to a linguistic group. But even they can't quite figure out, like, why or exactly how it happened, because the patterns are very strange and we don't have all the information needed to connect dots in more ways than through linguistics. So, it brings up a lot of interesting questions about symbology and how do people feel about the things that they're attached to. It's like, in really, Celt was not a term. It was not a term that was used by the people who were referred to as Celts. It was originally something that was more or less a Roman term for people who were kind of like the Gauls and kind of in that area. The Romans and I believe a couple other groups referred to them as Celts, and I think those other groups referred to them as Celts because the Romans did. Why the Romans chose that particular term, I don't know. It was Celt or Celtoid. I believe it came from a Latin word, and I can't remember what that is at the moment. That was early in the semester. But anyway, as we've kind of moved through various states of kind of having dominion over in various parts of those countries that are connected to that, by a bigger nation, you start seeing all of a sudden people really wanting to identify as Celt. Like, especially kind of the more romantic period as we got into like the Victorian age. That's when, like, some of these older histories that dated back to the early Greeks and Romans, the stories from those classical writers kind of got pushed forward and got reimagined or started being retold in a more romantic and flourished way. And then all of a sudden people got more interested in that history and in that retelling. And I don't blame them. These were people who have been ruled by another entity for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They've never had their own identity. So this thing that made them special and unique, they latched onto, and it it was rooted in language, but it's become a symbol for their particular identity, aside from this larger body that's been governing them. So it's been interesting kind of dissecting that at different points in time, in different countries, in different portions of countries, and seeing some of the places where it is really really very well rooted, like Wales. It's like the Welsh people have a very strong, like, they are Welsh. They are not English. Don't you dare say that they are English. And it's interesting seeing that kind of like, wow, they're not joking. Like this, this is really important to them. So yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting in the future to look back on that and do a little more digging. And when I eventually get into the spot where I'm going to need to do more formal papers, that'll be, those types of things are things that I will want to bring up, because it's definitely allowed me to look at things a little differently. It's interesting to see the patterns that are formed when you continue to look at it.
I think the other thing too, and I don't know if I have the words to really express what I'm hearing in my head, but there's, the ancient timeline is being rewritten as we speak, as we remember, as we experience this lifetime. So there was a time when we were aligned to a past that had no Atlantis or Lemuria, or rather that time Atlantis and Lemuria were, if you were in that time period, they were myths. And now we're coming to a time where a lot of us are waking up. And what does waking up mean? It means aligning to new truths that we couldn't align to before. And as more and more of us align to those truths, the ancient timeline shifts to support those truths.
Sure.
Which to you and me may not be all that mind-boggling anymore, because we've had several years under our belts to get it.
True.
But to a lot of people, those same people who have a difficult time remembering that words are conceptual and not concrete, are going to be like, that's not how it works. That's impossible. And it's like, sorry, but that actually is how it works, because everything is happening right now. So whatever we are stepping into in order to experience, that becomes the new truth. And it's like, picture two scales with, put more weight in the scale that you'd like to see manifest. And suddenly you get a timeline where we start to uncover new monoliths. We start to find new information on megaliths. We start to find new underground passages in Egypt. We start to realize that, oh, hey, all this time, this information has been suppressed by this one person. Oh, how did that happen? And
yeah,
it's not necessarily that stuff existed before. It's that now we are creating a world in which it did exist before. So the past timeline that we think is so concrete and unchanging and immutable is actually changing right along with this current timeline. And that's how new information that was lost for generations comes back into our consciousness.
Our perspective has shifted. Our allowance of certain things has shifted, and it opens doors for those new items to come through.
Absolutely.
Things that you wouldn't possibly have accepted previously, you are now willing to accept, or at least be curious about, and be curious enough to go, well, hold on, I don't know about that. If somebody gave me, the information that made it click for me, I could understand that. You know, I love it when I'm watching shows and I'm like, I'll buy that. And I'll catch myself saying it, and it's funny because it's like, did they necessarily give me proof? No, but I ran it through my internal bullshit meter, and my internal bullshit meter said, that's the way we remember it. And I'm like, okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. I'm open to that. Like, I'd like to dig into that a little more. I'd like to know more about that. I
Mm-hmm.
think that would be something interesting to look at. And it's helping to widen the perspective. It's helping to shift the point of observation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like we're all looking through a particular lens, we're all looking out a particular window. Depending on which direction you're facing in, you're going to see a very different landscape.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but what happens when you go outside the building? What happens when you're in a free moving 360-degree rotating platform, and now you see all directions from a different perspective that allows you to take in more?
Mm-hmm.
It shifts. It should change your mind.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't change your mind, then there's something that you're holding on to.
Mm-hmm.
um so yeah, it makes it really interesting. It was funny. What was it, 2 or 3 days ago? And we'll definitely have to sit down and watch this together. But I had a subscription to the Gaia Network, oh, for several years, and I put it on pause for the last, like, I don't know, 3 months or so, because I realized that I was still paying for it and I really wasn't watching it. There hadn't been anything new that had come up that like, like during the pandemic, I think I had watched everything on the channel because I
Because
needed
there was
something
nothing else to
different
do.
than just, there was nothing else. Well, nothing else was getting created. So, so besides your random YouTube channels, and, I needed something else. So I burned through, all of the things that kind of reached out to me on that channel pretty quickly. And I had been seeing little advertisements pop up here and there for a newer series that they're doing. And I kept thinking to myself, oh, that's interesting, but I don't think that I'm ready to pay for the subscription again just to watch that thing. And the other day I saw where it's like, thank you for your payment to Gaia. And I'm like, I thought I had that on pause. It's like, well, apparently my pause ran out.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, well, crap. And I'm like, well, while I have this thing, let me look up this new show that looked interesting. And let's see if I can actually find the name of it. It's about sound.
Shocker.
I know. Shocker, shocker, shocker. Let's see if I can actually see. It's called, the series is called The Sound of Creation. And I think there's 8 episodes right now. If you're not familiar with the Gaia Network, think back to some of the earlier, like, Nat Geo and History and Travel Channel specials when they were starting to gather together the, Greg Braden and what's his name with the crazy hair, the UFO guy. I can never remember
The
his
Greek dude.
name.
The Greek dude.
Yeah,
I don't know his
yeah.
name.
And and like a bunch of these different experts in whatever fields. It's similar to that, but they've added some additional, like, folks to talk to. And some of it is very like you're watching a special on a particular subject in school where there's lots of fun graphics, and some of it is like that, and you're like, yeah, I get it. And then occasionally they'll roll over something and I'm like, whoa, wait. Pause. And I'm like, I need to hear that again. It's like, oh, that's interesting. But it's funny to me to watch. If you're not familiar with the channel, Gaia is much more of I'm not going to say metaphysically based, but pretty much it's metaphysically based.
I'm not going to say it, but it is.
I'm not going to say it, but it is. Like they don't really push it that way, but it's definitely along those lines. It's a lot more open to, shows on UFOs and on supernatural experiences, and then you get like the other section that's like, here, if you want to know yoga or tai chi or qigong, or here's all of the videos you can use to do that. And I think most of the time they're pushing that, and they're trying to get people to, it's like, oh, well, people are really open to yoga. Let's show
It's
all the
the
yoga
gateway
that we
drug.
have. Right. But once you actually delve into it, and trust me, there are some things on there that I'm like, even I will not watch. I'm like, no, no thanks. But it is, if you're in that kind of spot where you're like, I don't know how open I am yet, and you're curious to know how open you are, this is a good channel to explore. I think it's like, I'm trying to remember how much it is a month. I can't honestly remember.
Because this is not
I don't think it's
sponsored.
that expensive. No, absolutely not sponsored. But hey, Gaia, if you want to sponsor us, using our inside voice at gmail.com. Just saying. Yeah, it's an interesting channel to look into and kind of peruse through and see what piques your curiosity, because there's definitely some interesting stuff. But
I don't
this
think
particular,
I don't think I've quite gotten. Yeah, I don't think I've quite gotten what was interesting about this one in particular.
so this one in particular, they're talking about sound, but what you really have to understand is what all sound encompasses. And what sound really encompasses is energy, frequency, vibration. Sound is just really our reference for what we are physically hearing audibly, not for everything that it entails. So they go over a lot of things, like some of the earlier in the earlier episodes, they go over earlier studies where they were showing, like what happens when you put sand on a vibrating platform and you're playing a particular sound or particular music, and the shapes that it creates, and how that aligns with monks in the high Himalayas and their chanting, and where they are kind of going when they're chanting, and in spiritual space, and the mandalas that are drawn during or right after meditation that are lining all of the monastery walls. It's like these are all interpretations of the sound, of the frequency, of the vibration that they're creating. And they kind of start dissecting all of this fun stuff. And it's especially fun for me because that's kind of my thing.
Kind of,
But it was
thing.
it's absolutely my thing. But it was interesting to see them get into, again, some of like the symbology of, how our words are used, and kind of some of the earlier civilizations and how they coveted certain words, and only certain words were only used within certain groups or at specific times because they felt that they were symbolic of of a particular frequency. It's like the word was just a symbol.
That's so weird. I'm sorry. It just that I wasn't expecting this to come up, and I just experienced this the other day.
Okay.
I told you
Shoot,
about
like
it.
what?
Um, I had come out of a long court battle, supporting a friend through a court battle that I still haven't quite processed yet, and don't know how I want to talk about yet. But the experience of it pulled me out of my very lightweight and casual schedule and threw me into a very strict, intense schedule that was not at all up to me. I was, as she was, subject to the workaday world schedule, the court schedule. And aside from that, aside from the fact that it made me wear shoes for more time than I have in the past 5 years, and it made me wear people clothes for more time than I had in the past 2 years, and it made me get up regularly to an alarm clock more than I have in the past 10 years. And, there were a lot of things that I hadn't had to do with my life in a very long time, but it was all compounded. I was fine with all of the changes. It was it was not nice because the reason behind it was gross, but it was almost, it was a nice contrast to what I normally do in my daily life. However, having to be among the energies that I was among, I had to deal with the public more than I have in the past 4 years. I had to deal with lawyers more than I had to deal with in my life. I had to deal with court restrictions and etiquette and things that I don't believe in, more than I have in years. I had to deal with just being in the areas, the socioeconomic areas that I had to be in was taxing in and of itself. But the most taxing thing was being in the court building itself, because this building, for those of you who do not live in or around LA, the court building that we were in is a 1970s brutalist monstrosity that is lined. Every hallway is lined with quartz filled panels. Like, you can literally see the little quartz geodes inside these panels. There is not one yielding or forgiving surface within this building. The benches are hard. In the hallway, they're concrete and stone. The floors are hard. The walls are all straight and right angled. There's not one forgiving curve. There's not one open window. There are two entrances on either side of the building for people to come in and out, and those doors remain closed unless someone is coming in or going out. And everything else is just a rigid, unforgiving, straight edge. And it's just the most horrible, full of, crystals that haven't been friggin' cleansed since the building's inception. They haven't seen sun. They haven't had fresh air. Not even a sage bundle has been lit within the building, guaranteed, because it's full of wonderfully asleep people who think what they're doing actually matters. No offense to y'all, but y'all playing a game and don't know it. And I was trying to describe it to a friend of mine because I don't think many people give it much thought. They just go. They know it sucks especially if you have like jury duty and you're stuck there, you're their guinea pig for the day and you have to go where they tell you to go and you have to sit where they tell you to sit and you have to do what they tell you to do. It sucks. But I was trying to process the depth and breadth of the suck. And the only thing that I could come up with that didn't even seem to touch, like the words, normally being a Gemini, I'm going to wax poetic as much as I can. So you really get the impact of the crap I just went through. And all I could do was say it was like being trapped inside of someone else's hate. And I was like, did I mean to say that? Is that really the best I can do? Like, and I had to say it again out loud. It was like being trapped in someone else's hate. And I burst into tears.
Yeah.
Because the frequency of the word hate resonated so overtly with my experience that I had not chosen the word to describe. It wasn't an adjective, that you would use in a traditional sense of the word. Although apropos, I mean, it wasn't used for that purpose. It was used to resonate with the frequency of what I had experienced. And I hadn't really, if I've done it before, I haven't noticed. I mean, I notice when my words resonate with me, but this resonance was just like, boom, it was like, you will not be denied.
The pluck.
Yes, I could. And it was intense. And all I could do was cry because you felt like you were at the mercy and trapped inside someone else's hate. And what a horrible experience to be trapped in.
Yeah.
And we create these experiences on a regular basis for people to be trapped in. And it just made me all at once. It made me question. I mean, no lie. I had been questioning society since this whole thing started, this court battle. And it just made me question it more. Like, what are we doing? We're literally making criminals and then punishing them. This court is not about justice. It's about punishment. And that's not something that is supported in a spiritual mindset. There is no such thing as punishment. Punishment is a falsely applied distortion designed to control people. It's designed to take away freedoms, behavioral freedoms. And that's not supported in a spiritual mindset. The whole reason you get on the spiritual path is to become sovereign. It's to empower yourself. It's to find your own definition of self-empowerment and to really tap into what that feels like. And it's a really difficult road to walk because everything in our society speaks to the opposite and encourages the opposite. You're rewarded if you follow along. And so it just was in that moment, tapping into that frequency like I had never tapped into it before. I was stunned. Like I literally couldn't say anything further about it because that was it. That was the string that I needed to pluck. And it was just hate.
Yeah. Yeah. Although, and it sucks that the situation occurred, but again, as we kind of like visit the importance of contrast in being here, it was also important, I'm sure, to visit that contrast and really see it in a way that maybe you hadn't seen it before, experience it in a way that maybe you hadn't before, so that you can relate to it in a different way and have more than one understanding of what that is representative of. I'm sure to some people, those buildings make them feel safe and make them feel protected at some point in time, depending on why they're there. But that's not everybody's experience.
Mm-hmm.
And you need both of those experiences to be available in order to thoroughly be able to investigate it. But yeah, this particular series is so far doing a pretty cool job at doing those deeper dives in a way that I think, some of the things I'm shaking my head and going, yeah, this is stuff that I've all heard before. I already know this. Show me something new. Show me something that I don't know, because that's what I wanted from this. But it was nice to see certain things being approached in a way that didn't feel didn't that felt more like they were talking about something that was common knowledge. One thing that I always get stuck on is when you're watching like specials or shows or things that you come across, or things that people on YouTube have made videos on, and they'll approach something, but it'll be very like, this is all very mystical, and like, it's like a secrets revealed type video. And although I can see the entertainment value in that, and I'm sure that helps to bring people in when they need to be brought in, so I don't have ill feelings against that. It's just cool for me when I'm watching something and people are talking very matter-of-factly about something that I understand on the same level, but that most people would probably, cock an eyebrow and go, huh? Like, what did they just say? And it's like, so I enjoy getting to see something where they're a little more like, oh yeah, of course, the pyramids are not the giant tombs that we thought that they were. These had different purposes, and they go through a lot of the there's a gentleman by the name of, I follow him on Instagram, I think it's Robert Grant.
Mm-hmm.
He does a lot of the math behind frequency stuff, and it's a lot beautiful. Of math. Mm-hmm. I like to see it. There's something inside me, like if I see it like all written down, and like there's all these really beautiful notes and things that he posts on like Instagram and his other channels and such, and with drawings and everything, and it looks great. And there is something intrinsically inside me that says yes and loves that. Although my brain goes, you do not math.
No.
Like, you do not math. This is not a thing that you do. Mm-hmm. But I am okay with some portion of me understanding that whatever he's doing there is absolutely 1000% correct. And I cannot tell you any of the hows or whys or any of that. I don't need to know. I don't need to be able, like, girl, this is not your job this time around. You do not need to explain this to anyone else. That's why we have that guy. That guy is going to explain it to everybody else. And I'm like, sweet. I just want to look at his pretty pictures, because they do something internally to me that I still don't understand. Like, I see the sacred geometry and things like that, and my insides light up. They are like, yes, this is that right there. That's a thing. That is an absolute thing. And my brain is like, okay. Like, we know it's a thing. We're so happy for you that you're so happy about whatever it is that we just saw. We have no idea how to explain it to anyone. We have no idea how to explain it to ourselves, but we know it's correct. So whatever, cool. But they've layered a lot of those, like, so there's something for everyone. Mm-hmm. So people who are math geeks are probably going to look at it and go, oh, that's really cool. And then I can, take that piece of knowledge and I can go from here to here to here. People who are music fiends are going to be interested in the science behind how it all kind of comes together, and looking at, like, they were showing the math that kind of coincides with the way that a piano is laid out, and how the notes are distributed, and how playing certain groupings is, like that particular grouping is creating a very specific frequency and vibration that creates something or triggers something very specific within us. So, so yeah, it's been cool over the last couple of days. I think we have like maybe 2 or 3 more episodes to watch in the series. But so far it's been pretty cool, and I've seen there are a couple of things. I have a class that I'm teaching on energy and frequency coming up. Actually, I pushed it to next month. But there are some scenes, at least, that I think I'd like to share during the class, because they just do a nice job at kind of summing up and explaining a lot of the intricacies that we just don't normally think about. We think of it in a very, sound is another one of those things that we think about in a very, linear way. It's like, oh, it's something that we hear. It's music. It's, it's like, well, what happens when you flip that script and you start understanding that it's something that you feel, and that it's something that you project, and it's something that other people project. And, what happens when you walk into a field of a particular frequency. And it's very interesting to see that portrayed on a screen in front of you in a more scientific environment. Like they were showing how certain things become projected, and they had particular equipment attached to this individual, a lot of sensors and things on the head, and showing, on the screen you were seeing the brain activity and where in the brain things were being lit up. And then there was a particular frequency involved, and another instrument that they were using to read what was external of this individual was placed, just like a few feet away from them. And you could see this person wasn't speaking, but they were projecting a particular frequency, and this other instrument is picking it up and lighting up because it's being put out there. And that's what this other instrument is meant to do, is pick up frequencies. So it's interesting to see that kind of dynamic in that way. It's like, for myself, I don't need that to know that it's happening, because I feel it on a very deep level. But I think for someone who's not quite there yet, or who, maybe hasn't really fully opened up to that idea yet, it's interesting.
It gives them permission to start. Yeah, it gives them permission to start believing that that is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, that's something that's just been kind of very recently, but it seems like it ties in with everything else as well. You never know what's going to pop up.
So 3 weeks ago, I had an aha moment, and now I'm having a hard time. I have my notes with me because I don't remember exactly how it went. But with the guides, I've always had a hard time understanding how. I've really been interested in how, in that moment, that energy becomes matter, that something actually manifests into the material world. You can't see it before it's a thing. So how are you supposed to know how to do it? You know what I mean? And manifestation seems to be difficult for me in many
Mm-hmm.
regards, especially when it comes to, the things that I don't have that I want, which I think goes for anybody. But, for me, it's how do I make money? How do I do this? You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I was sitting there, and my brother orders food all the time, like 3 times a day, every day. Someone has to cook for him. He's ordering it, guaranteed. And he came in, I guess, and he asked me if I wanted some of what he ordered. And I said, "Why did you order so much?" And he said, "Because there was a minimum that the app requires in order for you to actually order it." And I was like, "Oh." And my brain just started sort of casually ruminating over this idea of the minimum. Like, how do they come up with this minimum? And my brain was like, it's probably like, 13 middle-aged white dudes in a room using some math equation on a dry erase board, trying to figure out what their minimum should be. And all of a sudden, this other voice, this external voice, this guide voice comes in and says, "What if not, though?" And I was like, what do you, what? Why you got to interrupt my flow, man? And they were like, "What if they just grabbed it out of midair?" And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, "Well, okay." And I was about to be like, "What's your point?" And then I was like, "Oh, I have a story that says professional business people do not just grab numbers out of the air. They have science and math behind their decisions, and they're not just going to choose $15 as the minimum that makes it worth delivering to this person." And the external voice was like, "But what if that's how it happens, though?" And I was like, "Huh. I mean, I guess it's their thing. They can do it." And they're like, "See, this is the thing, is that you have these beliefs that you don't have what it takes to do something like a delivery app. And one of the things that you don't have, or think that you don't have, is the science and math that tells you what's right." And they're like, "What if everything that you create was designed to be created by exactly what you had, which is a propensity for choosing random numbers out of midair? What if what you're meant to create doesn't require scientists? It just requires you picking random things and putting them down."
Mm-hmm.
And so I started playing with this concept, and they gave me the 4 steps of manifestation as they wanted me to have them at this time. The
Oh, cool.
first, the first being dream it. And I wrote, "The creamy comfort of exploring a concept in your imagination, the place I feel most comfortable and hence remain and retreat to when I reach the discomfort of the spongy stage." And I'll clarify about the spongy stage in a moment. Number 2, speak it. Speak it into the world. Allow the world to hear it. This does not mean tell everyone. You have seen how that depletes the energy. Yes, it feels good at the time, instant gratification, instant validation. False validation can and often will take the place of the rest of the journey. So they reiterated the lesson of don't diffuse your energy and allow instant gratification to take the place falsely of the actual manifestation that you want to head towards, because it will. The second you feel that thrill of, the other person gets it and they think that you're brilliant, it's all gone.
Mm-hmm.
You have nothing left. You've just used it all in that
Mm-hmm.
one fell swoop to feel good about yourself, and now you're a loser again. So they say speaking it is your way of dabbling, playing with this idea as if it existed, but it does not yet exist. It has not yet been made manifest. This is when they really started to come through me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so the spongy feeling exists between pulling it down and the next phase. Um, I guess I haven't gotten to pulling it down. So let me get to pulling it down. That's number 4 in the 4-step process of manifestation, as they would like me to think of it at this current time. Pull it down. Allow it not to float outside in the air. Pull it down to you and work it with your hands. Break it down into deliverables. Move between those deliverables instinctively. Do not allow yourself to obsess over sticking points. Trust that each sticking point serves a purpose of timing. Move to another task, even if it is for another project, to maintain a baseline momentum. Trust that inspiration will remain as long as you are not allowing yourself to revel in the immediate gratification that sharing brings. And I was like, there's a lot in there. Sounds very simple, but there's actually a lot in there. And it actually, just number 4 is its own little process of pulling it down.
Mm-hmm.
And they were giving me the example of, I guess, let me get into the spongy feeling, because that taps into the example that they gave me. So the spongy feeling that I tapped into when they started giving me this message, where I was like, ew, like this, I don't like this. This is kind of uncomfortable. And I just rather go back to the dream it, you know. The spongy feeling exists between pulling it down and the next phase. It is literally the energy of process of allowing something to manifest into your reality. If you are having trouble making an idea concrete, the stories you hold that stop you are held here. So it's your ego that is creating a block as opposed to something related to timing or to your greatest good. So that spongy feeling where you're starting to flirt with the idea of making this a reality, that spongy feeling is your ego colliding with your soul. That spongy feeling is your ego telling you, but you have things that you need that you don't have yet. So you can't do that. You know?
Gotcha.
Getting all bossy with you. So when you start to feel that kind of like it's soft here and it doesn't really feel firm to stand on, and I don't know if I want to, gosh, you know, this is icky. Like just that hint, that subtle hint of icky is your stories coming up ready to crush your dreams. So if you can hang on through the spongy phase, then you can get to a more solid ground. And here's the process of getting to solid ground. The process of getting to solid ground is, you know, when they said something like make it manifest, when they said write it out, they mean make it concrete, as in journaling it, journaling the idea and taking inventory of what that idea actually consists of. Like, what parts of this do I actually have right now? And then they brought up, when I was creating the shared space website, they brought that up and they're like, you know, you were worried and stuck on all these little bits and pieces that you didn't have. And all you needed to do was pull down a number out of midair and plop it onto the page as a space holder. You're so concerned with plopping the right thing onto the page or sliding the right thing into the slot that you refuse to allow momentum to take its course. And they're also showing me when I write books or short stories or anything like that, I'm unable to do what writers recommend, which is just write it out without any editing. Just let your freak flag fly and write whatever and know that it's a rough draft and it's going to suck. That's what editing's for. I edit as I go. I can't help myself. I'm this little obsessive compulsive control freak when it comes to that stuff. Every time I'm creating something, every step has to be curated and perfect right in that moment. And there can be no mistakes because I want it to be perfect so I don't have to go back and do it again. And I'm literally lurching to a stop, stopping my momentum in that moment instead of saying, so I'm going to charge $15 for this thing I'm selling. And then instead of going forward with that and start fleshing out the rest of whatever you're fleshing out, like a web page, and putting in other art or other colors or choosing another font, I will sit there and go, but is $15 enough or is it too much? And how do I know? Maybe I should do research on figuring that out. What are other companies doing? Blah, blah. You know what I mean? And my mind is not at that point yet of fleshing it out. And I don't recognize that because I have a story that says everything has to be done in order, sequentially. This is how it must happen. And if I can start letting that need for sequential perfection, if I can start letting that go, I will, as I did with my website, have a lot more success. They're like, that's why we needed you to complete your website so badly. It's not so that people could find you, although that is a nice benefit of having completed your website. It's so that you could have a full and current example of your work process and where you get stuck so that we could show you and use it as a contrast for this 4-step manifestation process. And after you finally get past that spongy stage and you start pulling it down into reality by putting it into a website or, bringing in the right people for the project to do certain, divvying up the different jobs within the project that need to be done, however your manifestation process starts to take place, they say solidify it. Solidification. Okay, so it's a 5-step process. I hadn't turned the page yet. I surprised myself. So solidification, the process that allows the many ideas that make up the master idea to marinate, marry, coalesce, weave together. It could be as simple as sitting together on a page, a book page, a web page, a social media page, a published page. Once published, it is manifest and you have sent it into the reflective reality to show you how to refine and reform. And the process can begin again from a new angle, through a new lens, with a new focus. This is manifestation. And I was like, so each time you write it, the cycle's supposed to go back to the beginning and start again. And that's another problem that I have with manifestation is I see this big picture and I can't friggin' see the road to get to that big picture because I am blown away by the idea and the largeness of it. And it seems so much bigger than me. And they're like, you have to keep doing the process over and over again. This is why you keep getting stymied every time you have a great idea.
So they just gave me a little message and they said, think of it like a Thomas guide. They're like, the destination is not on the page that you are on, and it does not matter how many times you look at that page. If you are stuck on that page, you are not going to find the rest of the map for how you need to get to where you are going. It is it's simply not there.
Do people know what Thomas guides are?
I don't know, but it's the only thing that I can think. Like, that's exactly what they showed me. They showed me a Thomas guide, and they're like, try to find it, try to find it, try to find the destination. It's not there. It's not on that page. Right. It's on A22. Right. And you have to get to A22. And if you remember how fucked up a Thomas guide is organized, it does not mean you flip the page. It means you have to go and find wherever A22 is, and A22
50 pages might exist, 50 pages on
50 pages forward or backward from where you actually are right now. Right. And they were like, and there you go.
Yeah.
Boom, boom. And it's like, oh, dear Lord.
Yeah.
So yeah, for all you youngins, look up Thomas Guide or ask your folks. Your parents will tell you about Thomas Guides, or your granny will tell you about Thomas Guides.
Right.
But
as you're pulling down the idea and you get to that point where you feel it may present itself as trepidation, it may present as anxiety, it may present as an excitement that you can't quite harness, and so it feels too fast, it feels too much. All of those are indicators that you have hit upon a pocket of stories that tell you you can't have that thing, that you don't have what it takes to have that thing. And they have been implanted or programmed within you to stop you, or to make you stop yourself, rather. And they're like, don't worry about it. And they also reminded me, it's beyond a pothole, it's quicksand. It's quicksand. You can move through it. It's probably very shallow. You just have to have faith that it's shallow. They reminded me of when I do sessions with people and they're starting to doubt, I'm not deep enough. For those of you who don't know, I do hypnotic regression. And a lot of times people will freak themselves out thinking that they don't have what it takes to get into a state where they can channel on their own behalf. And they will inevitably say something along the lines of, I'm not deep enough. I'm not there. I can't do this. Nothing's coming in. I'm nowhere, blah, blah, blah. And the trick is the more you speak, the more you'll get there. But you have to allow the words to come out of your face. They don't have to be correct. You don't have to judge
censor
them.
yourself.
Yes. Don't censor yourself.
Censor.
Just let the words come out of your face. Let them fall out of your face. Let them sound crazy. I'm on a swan and I'm flying through space. Let it happen. Let it happen. Because the imagination is how they get you there, especially when you find it difficult to let go of that control. And that the same thing goes for the manifestation process.
Well, and they have to disconnect you from your beta state.
Right.
In order to do that.
They have to disconnect you.
Simply not going to allow that.
Right. And they have to sometimes.
It's not what it's built for.
Right. They have to disconnect you from, quote, making sense, because you are trying to get to a different realm that you are not used to experiencing. And one of the ways they do that is they access your imagination and give you crazy stuff that later on, when you're listening to the recording, becomes clear because it's actually energetically coded to give you the information you were seeking. Your beta brain just couldn't understand at the time. And that's the thing that I struggle with most with clients, is that it's up to them whether or not they trust and believe what I'm saying.
1000%. And that is true not just for hypnosis, but for practically any type of work of this nature. Mm-hmm. If you are not in a place of trust in yourself, mm-hmm. and what you will allow to come through, your experience is going to be exactly whatever you allow yourself to experience. Mm-hmm. And it has nothing to do with the person on the other side of that. It has everything to do with you. And that's that right there. Man, people have a hard time understanding that. Yeah. And it's like, you made up your mind before you even showed up. You already set the parameters for what you thought was going to be acceptable, or, and that's expectation. But that's all built around this state that we're in 90% of the time, most of us, in order to live a very task-filled life. It has to be that way, or you will not stay on quote unquote the task. Mm-hmm. You will not be able to complete because it requires a very linear, very defined. It is a very structured thing. Mm-hmm. And once you kind of cross that road into that metaphysical spiritual space, it is absolutely not that. Yep. It is not structured. Mm-mm. It is not defined. It is not linear. You're going to jump all over the place. You're going to say things and realize, oh, that was a symbol. That was a symbol for this thing that happened. And now I understand, because now I've allowed that to come up and come through. I've unlocked that door, and now I can see at least a portion of what that is. And the more you lean into it, the more they're going to pull you back, the wider your vision of whatever that is going to be or become. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because that will, it's like a chain reaction. It's like a snowball effect of, one thing triggers another thing, triggers another thing, triggers another thing. And it's not just all in that space. I've had things come up in the last several weeks that have related to, in fact, things that have come up in session for me years ago. And that's been really interesting. And it just reminded me of that. One was, and now I can't even remember exactly what it's in regards to, but there was there was a short regression that we did probably 3.5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
where I was visiting a very specific time, and you'll remember this, I think. And one of the things that I saw was a structure that was meant to be like a generator, and it had a very specific shape, and it had a very specific number of rings around the top. Do you remember this? Kind of,
Vaguely.
sort of, vaguely. I saw it again out of nowhere in one of these episodes that I was just telling you about on this
Ha!
Gaia show. They showed it, and I'm like, and it was funny because I didn't have to say a word. I went, huh! And at the exact same time, Brian did it too, because he knew. He's like, holy cow, that's that thing that you saw. That's
What
that
was
thing that
it?
you were trying to talk about. It was a type of generator. So, um, man, and now it's like we were watching it like right before sleep, and I wish I could remember exactly what it was, but basically like what they showed, the first part of what they showed was the columns, some of the columns used in Egyptian temples. And they're the columns that have a flared bottom, and they come up, and they have 4 rings around the top. And they were like, they were kind of explaining that it's not something that we pay super close attention to. We're just looking at them like structures that help to hold, things that help to hold up a structure. They're like, that's not what it's for. They're resonators.
Mm-hmm.
And then they showed other drawings of like other civilizations, how these things were used, and like there was math, and anyway, it is a part
And there
of
was
a
math.
bigger, and there was math, because that's all I can give you right now. Sorry. I'd have to go back and watch it again, because and I want to, because it was one of those things that, like, when I saw it, I was like, damn, okay. Always fun when you see something that's like reflective of something that you're like, I don't know, it's this thing and it looks like this, and I know it's important, but I couldn't tell you
Mm-hmm.
exactly what, but I know other people who will know. And 3.5 years later, I'm watching the show and going, holy shit, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
you know um but essentially it's a resonator. And they were showing like other schematics of like, look at these things and how they exist. And then they showed, I remember the other thing that they showed were modern power lines, or right, power lines, yes, modern power lines. And they were showing the top of the power line, and they're like, look at these like, the first thing that comes to mind is nodes. I don't know what else to call them. These little things that stick out of the top of the power lines. They're like, this is a modern version, basically, of that. Like, it comes from the same base thought, but it doesn't do anything near as what this thing did. It
Mm-hmm.
was kind of where they were comparing and contrasting modern versus ancient technology, and kind of showing, look, we think that these things are very rudimentary, but they are so far complex to
Mm-hmm.
what we have now. It's like, this puts, this thing in ancient times put this thing in modern times to shame, because we don't fully understand what it is for. And I think that's actually, if I remember right, in this particular episode, that was the point, is that they were sharing, or they were trying to relate that There have been times in antiquity when the particular frequency of the planet at that time offered us insight that was much deeper and far reaching than what we have now
And that's what I was
available
hearing in
to
my head.
us.
That's what I
But
was hearing.
that we're starting to roll into that
Yeah.
again,
Yep.
into one of those periods where that's going to open up like that again. But they're like, look, just because they didn't have the same tools as us, just because they didn't have X, Y, and Z does not mean that they, did not have a way of doing it. And some of that just simply had to do with where they were in their particular evolutionary state at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and their understanding of things. Like, there are things that they could make happen that we would have no access to right now, because we just, even with all of our technology, we don't have the understanding. We are not sitting in the right space for those things to click and line up in order to
Right.
make that happen again.
Right. The one thing that they've been
Um,
showing me over and over again, such a it's a perfect reference, so I get it, but it's just weird for me. But they keep on showing me birth control. You know, the little flat compacts of birth control where you spin it
mhm,
so you know you're on the right day. That's how they're
mhm.
showing me timelines right now. Is they're showing me a compact of birth control, and you have to line up wherever your birth control is lined up to.
Yeah,
That's the pill you get for that day. Except they're talking about
yeah,
it on a much more vast scale of energy
exactly,
frequency. But that's the image they're showing.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it was very interesting to kind of watch this transpire and to see that particular thing pop up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was just one instance where that has happened recently. But if I was not open to that, if I was not open to receiving those things, then it would have triggered for me later on down the line. Um, so yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I have on that at the moment. So I don't know. What do you think? We're we're having this back and forth conversation, so I'm going to go ahead and let the rest of you in on it. We're looking at our timestamp and going, "Oh my god, we've been doing this for almost 2 hours. Do we want to end it?"
Yeah, I think the time has come.
The time has come.
I'm talked out,
The time
and
has come to silence ourselves.
my stomach says it's time.
His tummy says, "It's time for food,
It's
y'all."
it's dinner time. Yeah,
I can totally. Okay, I have one thing. Let's see. I have like 5 minutes before we actually hit the 2 hour mark.
hit it.
There was something while you were talking earlier that came up, and so I'm gonna spit it out there real quick because I wrote
Mm-hmm.
this just recently. They wanted me to tie in sacral work to the retrograde.
Huh.
I have a sacral sound bath coming up next week, and I got this flash, and they were like, "It works together. It works together. Listen." And so what they gave me was, so how does the sacral tie into retrograde? During retrograde, it's easy to get caught up in the memes and the lore around pitfalls and the dangers of retrogrades. And although some caution can help us, when that healthy dose of skepticism turns to fear, we fall out of trust with ourselves. We question our ability to make decisions on our best behalf, and we deny our passion and creativity. And this puts us in a very vulnerable position in relation to our sacral. We often retreat in a self-deprecating way, and we lock up our desires to move forward. These are the times when we tend to be most stagnant, but we don't need to be. And then in relation with Mercury retrograde particularly, retrograde is essentially showing us a different perspective, a different angle. It's asking us to see something and even do something differently. And as much as it may seem like a hindrance, it's actually an opportunity. And there's no better time than to link up the sacral or activating the sacral than during the retrograde, because the sacral is a part of those energetic channels that we use to process our emotions. It's the seat of our passion, our creativity, our life force energy, and it's also the lens through which we judge ourselves and our abilities. So when we're not acting from a place of passion or creativity, we tend to get down on ourselves, turn inward, and lose faith in our desires and our ability to see them through or give birth to new ideas. So with this retrograde, let's take a hint from Mercury and look at fulfilling our desires from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Works for me.
Sweet. And then it was interesting because they made me look up, when I made the decision to go back to school, what was happening astrology-wise, and we were in a retrograde.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge point of
you
shift.
Definitely went back.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a big shift, and I'm glad I did it, because it triggers stuff for me all the time that I don't think would have been triggered in quite such a succinct way as it is when I'm doing that. So I am grateful.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, my friends, I think we're going to close this up. Join us next time as we use our inside voice to talk about, whatever pops into our little heads. And until then, this is Jamie.
And I'm Heather.
And we are using our outside voice to say, stay safe, stay sovereign, and we will see you again very, very soon.